Welcome back to conjuredcraft. My name is Taryn, and this week we're making a kaiju. If you're not following me online, you may be wondering why. Well, together with my friends Paige and Sam, we launched a community event called Kaiju Kitbash. We asked you to make kaijus so that we could make them battle for ultimate glory, so it only seemed appropriate that I also make one. Using the Kaiju Kitbash zine that Paige created, I rolled some dice and got the following prompts. The way my brain works, I somehow was reminded of carcinization, which is how non-crab crustaceans eventually evolve to be more crab-like. And at the same time, while thinking about a giant apex predator like a kaiju, I was reminded of tyrannid biotitans. Tyrannids, in general, have always had a confused design language. In the center of a big Venn diagram of reptiles, insects, and of course crustaceans, you will find tyrannids. During my designs, I wondered, what if there was a very old biotitan, something that had been lost in the warp, and as a result, hasn't evolved the same as the rest of the hive. Instead, it's become darker, more twisted, and perhaps even crueler. I've recently been made aware of what I'm calling the miniature base binary, which is people who seem to only like square or round bases. Much like the gender binary, this is both silly and made up, so I'm doing my part to combat it by using a huge hexagonal base. I know that the Hierophant Biotitan, the official model, doesn't actually come with a base. And I get that. It's a huge model that you would need to travel with, but I think that for my purposes, it would negatively impact the scale of our kaiju. I'm also a firm believer that your base is just as important as the model. It not only literally grounds the piece in the world, but it's a part of the overall storytelling. Even at 28mm scale, this is going to be a massive piece of terrain, and the fact that this tyrannid can easily scale over it really adds to the intimidation of this creature. I've been cutting and gluing some thick packing cardboard, loosely modeled on the Vasquez rocks in Agua Dulce, California. I'm going to cover this armature with some cheap all-purpose wall filler to get these to look more like actual rocks. If you try this at home, be sure to mix the wall filler with some black paint first, which will help hide any future chipping or cracks. I forgot to do this with the first coat, but I need a second coat anyway, so it should all turn out just fine. Now, there's no shortage of ways to make miniature stones in this hobby. The only correct way, in my opinion, is to use materials you already have and have fun with the process. As messy as my method was, I really enjoyed sculpting in the faces of the rocks, carving striations into the side, and just winging it a little bit. Once the craggy formation was all cured, I started doing a texture pass on the base using all kinds of leftovers I've been accumulating. Bits of egg carton cardboard, some cured pieces of epoxy clay, and a hobby favorite, cork. To tie in these various textures, I mixed up some dried coffee grounds with PVA glue and just smeared it sporadically around the base. This may need one final texture pass later on, which can be achieved with a number of materials, but I'm going to use some chalk spray paint to cheat it, just like I did on my alien terrain board. In my recent travels this year, I picked up this 3D printed piece from the bits pile at Salute Fringe. The way the neck curves really spoke to me. The idea of this hanging off of a cephalothorax of our creature helped inspire the whole project. I'm not sure what range this particular piece comes from, but if you know, please pop it down in the comments so that way everybody else can find it. Before adding anything, I cleaned up the rough edges with some wet sanding and used my pin vise to deepen the existing voids, so now they look like more intentional orifices. Please be sure to use proper safety equipment whenever you're working with 3D printed resin. Similarly, when I was at Adepticon, I acquired some Tyrannid bits, largely just because I've never had any before. Using them as a reference, I went on to model the arms of my creature. So that way there's a faint trace of the hive origins for our kaiju. Maybe this proboscis-like mouth inside the chitinous shell has been less warped over time because it's more protected. I don't know, we're just kind of making up biology as we go. Also, to make sure that my model meets the legal requirement of a Kitbash, I've just cut off the claws from the Tyrannid arms and stuck them on. It's still a Kitbash even if I sculpt 99% of the model by hand, right? In the past, I've taught you how to start large models on my channel, crushing up balls of aluminum foil, persuading them into shape, and then coating with a layer of polymer clay. That's the kind that cures in the oven. My clay is old at the moment and has started to dry out, which means it needed some extra conditioning. But once it's cooled off, it will give me a solid base to sculpt on. To really drive home the mutation of this Titan, I wanted the opening for this internal creature to be fleshy, since the exterior of most of it will be a rough carapace. This part of the monster is modeled after the underside of a facehugger from Alien. It's pretty obvious that the works of H.R. Giger are an influence on this faction, so it felt right to include some more of his work on my kaiju. Rather than doing the fine details of this piece in polymer clay, I'm using epoxy clay. That's the kind that comes in 2 parts and you mix them together. For one thing, I prefer the feeling of working with epoxy clay these days, and I simply cannot afford to run my oven constantly now that I live in England. That being said, you can absolutely do this with whatever materials you have at home, but I would rather put my money towards more hobby supplies over the national grid. While I repeat many of the steps you just saw me do before, I wanted to use this time to talk a little bit more about the kaiju genre. There's absolutely no doubt that it's thanks to the success of Godzilla and the many spin-offs from the franchise that we're even talking about kaiju right now. And while I am a fan of the king of all monsters, I would ask that you have a look at my favorite giant monster movie, Tarantula. Just 11 months after Godzilla's release, this giant spider was in theaters across America. I didn't really get to watch any television growing up, but I was allowed to watch classic monster movies at my Uncle Henry's house. And so, Tarantula was my first kaiju. Unlike its Japanese counterpart, which deals with the anxieties of the nuclear age, the events of this film are set in motion by a scientist trying to solve world hunger. In an attempt to help the human race, he inadvertently creates a means for its destruction. The special effects have always stuck with me, and having rewatched it for this project, I'm happy to say they've aged exactly how I thought they would. The whole film is available on the Internet Archive, and I hope you pop it on for your next movie night. Links down below. Now, not to make you think too much while watching a crafting video, but the kaiju genre is so much more than what we see at face value. Giant monsters fighting and destroying cities. They almost always touch on the unease of their times. Nuclear warfare, limited resources, the end of our species. You get the idea. This project, in its own way, is also me dealing with my anxieties. I could have made anything from my Kaiju and Kitbash, but I found a way to make it a Tyrannid. This being an obvious attempt to pull a limited audience from an overly saturated market towards my little channel. And I think part of the reason for that is that for a while now, creating and uploading videos has felt like my own Kaiju battle. Only I'm just a person with a sculpting tool trying to fight Algorithma, a rogue AI-generated mech that was supposed to be humanity's savior and has instead clogged up the spaces where art should be with stolen, soulless slop. Thankfully though, I love being a nuisance. No matter how much the tech industry tries to destroy the joy of making videos and art, I'm determined to keep poking back with my pointy stick and making some of the freakiest little guys you've ever seen. Speaking of which, trypophobia warning for this next section. In the 2 minutes of research I did on Tyrannids, I found that there are strains of Biotitan, and the one that called out to me the most was the Dominatrix, notably for the way that it can psychically control nearby Tyrannids. Naturally, I saw that and thought, well, what if it also birthed them right there on the battlefield? This birthing abdomen is being modeled directly on a lotus pod I recently acquired, and was just a little too frail to incorporate into the actual build. To get the final look I'm after, I'm making the starter holes larger than what I want. Then, after baking, I can push the tinfoil down with the rounded end of a sculpting tool and reinforce each cavity with some more epoxy clay. Generally speaking, when you work on clay sculpture, it is an additive process, meaning you're adding material rather than subtracting it. But of course, it can kind of go both ways. Since we are building up, you should start from the lowest points. After reinforcing the holes in this section, I move on to working on the outside of the abdomen, bringing it all the way to the final texture. Then I can work on each edge of the various birthing holes. Working on a sculpture like this in stages lets me ensure that the points of interest will pull the focus of the viewer. Even for me, this abdomen is pretty rough. One of my lovely supporters called it a giant powdered sugar donut hole filled with horrors, which I think describes it pretty perfectly. If you would like to be one of the fine folks who gets to see and roast my work early, join the Best Community Discord, get free digital goods, and even commission an original miniature from me, you can join our coven on the brand new conjuredcraft.com. Before wrapping up this part, I add some extra details to differentiate it from the lotus pod, and then blend in all that different clay. Whenever you have to manufacture multiples of something, you should always prototype, iterate, and get your process down before committing to making a bunch of copies. So off camera, I worked out one of these spider-like legs, took some notes, and then was ready to actually build the rest. I measured and cut each length of armature wire twice as long as what I need, so I can twist it on itself to make a strong skeleton for our legs. As a little bonus tip, if you don't have a power drill at home, you can also just use 2 pairs of pliers to tighten up your twist of wire. When I add on my clay, I'm making sure to beef up each of the joints to get that authentic, creepy, crawly look, but also to make sure that it's nice and strong and will support the weight of the rest of the sculpture. Then for texture, I'm using a custom roller that Sam, one of my cohorts, made for me. And it's honestly my new favorite toy. But with his texture roller and Paige's Zine, this project is now officially a collab. So my friends are equally responsible for making this upsetting monstrosity, and you can let them know how you feel in the comments down below. You'd think that with the legs completed, we're coming to the end of this project, but these individual parts can't just be glued together. There's all kinds of considerations that need to be made, and questions that need to be answered. Can I seamlessly blend the thorax to the abdomen? Have I forgotten to make claws after calling this creature a crab? And will I ever address it again? Can this artist, gone mad, complete this grotesque abomination in time for the deadline they set themselves? Like a fool, a damned fool? Before you skip away, I just wanted to show you this shirt. I commissioned one of my favorite artists, Brandon Yu, to help me make some new merch for you to hit the hard pose in. The art on the front is from my last project, Midas, tagline on the back. They're available as t-shirts, sweatshirts, and just for fun, I also have a dad cap with the tagline to complete your grimdark uniform. You can pick all these up and more at conjuredcraft.com. Now, our story can continue with our hero coming up with a clever solution, which is that I solved all the major assembly issues off camera. But the important thing is that it is ready for color. And for this project, I mean color. After priming, I mixed up a shade of brown that I liked and used that as my mother color. Sometimes I darken it down for shadows, other times brighten it back up for the highlights, but I eventually went mad. Using bright red and yellow to create warmth for the high points and blues and greens to cool it back down in the hidden places. There was a part of me that absolutely loved the result of the base coat, but I don't want this to distract too much from the Kaiju. So with a custom sandy shade, I dry brushed everything back down. This unifies all the textures and colors without detracting from my work. To get a little pop back in where it's needed, I started mixing up different shades of washes for each area. So for the bright yellows, a very warm rust wash. For the blues, a very deep green, with everything still being darkened by that mother color. If there's anything I want to be completely dark, black paint can come to the rescue. And that really is the beauty of using cheap craft store paints. They have less pigment in them than miniature paints, so I know that when they dry, they will always be lighter than what I'm seeing in person. This gives me the room I need to work down to the color I'm after. This base has turned into one of the best pieces of terrain I have ever made, and I might be convinced to try this technique on a table or battle board if that's something my coven members are interested in. Now, because of how much I enjoyed painting this base, I followed a very similar logic on the Kaiju, starting with some vibrant underpainting, dry brushing everything back down, and then selective washes to get the color back. Before starting this project, I was in a rabbit hole of oil painting videos, and I believe that's a big part of the influence for why I'm painting so differently. In my own way, I took what I learned from those videos and tried painting how I imagine one would with oil paints, with the one major flaw being that I don't have any oil paint. What I really mean is that I'm being a lot messier than I normally am. I'm watering my paints down frequently to increase their work time, but also so that I can blend them more directly on the model. I know it's not a one-to-one by any means, but I've been so inspired by the results that people like Nich and Jarrid are getting, and I'd really like to give it a go. So please, share this video with a friend to help me buy new paints and try new things. The bright undertones on our Kaiju are inspired by underwater sea life, which is one of the prompts I got for this creature, but we're seeing it at a point in time when it's been skittering on land. So the heavy dry brushing is to help achieve a more bleached look. There's only two parts of the Kaiju where I'm deviating from my Pride Month color scheme. First is the main shell, which I'll leave pretty plain and dusty to match the environment. The main pop of color is a deep wash in some of the recesses, which draws attention to the mutated spikes that I sculpted bursting through the shell. The second is the fleshy bits. I kept these pretty simple, just trying to emulate some grotesque reference images. a little blood for the blood god, some gloss for the girls, and we can call this project done. Given my track record for this year, I guess I only make large-scale projects now, so be sure to subscribe for the next thing I make, which has to be bigger than this, the biggest miniature I've ever made. I cannot thank Paige and Sam enough for creating this Kaiju showdown with me after one late-night Discord chat. Thank you so much to everyone who has and is still submitting their entries for Kaiju and Kitbash 2025. We will judge you as soon as we can and announce our champion and the prizes for the contest. My thanks as always to my coven for supporting me and my work, and thank you for watching this video. I'm so happy you're here. Until next time, I'll see you soon.